I think the topic that I led with Mr. Fleischer is the redistricting, or the election last night. Trump candidates won big. What's your reaction to that? What's your reaction to what is going on in Indiana Republican Indiana politics right now?
I haven't lived here in 30 years, so my knowledge of Indiana politics is relatively limited. You want to talk about my 30 years in Texas, I'm a little better at that. But I did watch it. I did look at the numbers before I came down this morning, and we did win a special election in Michigan, which I think there's a break between state ledge and federal races, and I think there's a distinct numbers split between those two. I don't know enough to know if I was surprised or not. What little I read going into it was there was a boatload of money spent. And so I tend to focus more on congressional races than I do on state legislators, but I can't say that I was overly surprised.
Do you think this adds to the sort of the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing these days when maps are drawn, not so much like 7-2, but to basically eliminate entire political parties and entire states?
Yeah, I think this push on out-of-cycle redistricting is a genie out of the bottle that's going to be really hard to put back in. And I don't think it's long-term productive. The 10-year cycle was predictable based on good data and let things settle down over a 10-year period before redistricting. This mid-cycle redistricting, I think, is overall counterproductive to longer-term efforts on both keeping people engaged and furthering democracy. I think it hurts.
From your time in the White House, can you talk about, I don't know, how unprecedented it is, or, if it's really unprecedented that the president decided to become so involved in something as tiny as these Senate races in Indiana over, political retribution or what have you?
Every White House is different, and how the president does politics is different depending on the individual. Presidential interest and involvement in local politics has always been there. I think the difference today is it's a lot more visible, but it's why every White House has an Office of Political Affairs. That's your job, is to keep track of what's going on in politics at the local level. We certainly did. I mean, we cared about every special election. We looked at state legislatures, et cetera, et cetera. It just wasn't a topic that you did much externally with. But for this president, it's a big deal. And, that's his choice. I'll leave it to the historians to say if it diminishes the role of the president or not. But every White House pretty much goes deep into politics at every level. They just do it different.
We didn't talk much about it, but I'm curious your perspective on, this president, this administration is so different when it comes to how he chooses to share information and how his administration chooses to share information. How different is it from, how you would have done it or your experience? I mean, having someone who might fire off a tweet or a Truth Social post, or
well, for context, there was no such thing. The internet in 1992 was incredibly limited. We had email, but just barely. But I will say we were openly criticized as a generational shift in 92, 93, and 94 by how we were far more engaged with local media than we were the White House press corps, and we were criticized immensely for that. Again, every White House looks at these things very differently, and they have a president who likes to be out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think that can be somewhat counterproductive over time, and I would just say keep your eye on the ball for November, and we'll see where that goes.
And it's interesting you bring that up because I kind of jokingly said every president sort of adapts to the news cycle that they're in. For example, when you folks came in, it was the 24-hour news cycle became the big deal. When Barack Obama came in, it was sort of Facebook and Twitter was the big thing.
Exactly. It is an ever change. there's an ever-changing media environment. Can I tell you what we would have done in 92 and 93 and 94 if the environment today was then? No, I have no idea. I don't know what we would have done. We would have to have been very different. We did things on the internet in a way that was so distinctly different for that time that you could make some of the same arguments against us that are being made against this White House, but the context is very, very different. I'm really glad we didn't have to deal with it. We had enough stuff to deal with.
How do you see AI is changing the landscape?
From a campaign White House standpoint or from a media standpoint?
I guess from
all
a
the
public
above
information standpoint, when we can fake things.
Yeah, look, I use AI. I'm an advocate for it. It has made research easier. It doesn't replace human eyes. It doesn't replace human eyes. It doesn't replace judgment, and it doesn't replace experience. If anything, it shortens an already impossibly short news cycle. But remember, they said the internet would kill everything as well. I'm not one that thinks AI is going to kill everything, but how we adapt to it, particularly from a media standpoint and from a campaign standpoint, you're going to have to figure it out. But it doesn't replace judgment.
And to piggyback on her comment, doesn't AI kind of force us to be better news consumers? Because since anybody can basically put out anything, it forces us to be more intelligent, more thoughtful, maybe more skeptical news consumers.
I'm hopeful. That's the case. To use AI to fact check means you got to rely on the large language model that AI is using. So it's a two-way street on that. Again, consumers of news got to use their own judgment too. If it sounds too weird to be true, it's probably too weird to be true.
I wish that were true more often.
Circling back to redistricting, you're not in favor of this mid-cycle redistricting,
No.
bad for the country. How do we get out of it? How can the voters,
Time. We just, we have a built-in self-correcting mechanism in our democracy, and I think over time it will right the ship when it comes to redistricting. We'll go back to 10-year cycles. We're at a very distinct moment in time, and I'm hopeful that it self-corrects. But I do think we should go back to the 10-year cycle. Because the census data matters. The census data fundamentally hasn't changed since the last sentence, and yet we're cutting districts based on assumptions around politics as opposed to around assumptions on data, and I think that's fundamentally flawed.
When you look at sort of America where we are right now in retrospect, go back to Vietnam, the Great Depression, World War I, the Civil the Civil War, the whole 9 yards. How would you rate sort of this time in history compared to times past?
Well, I finished high school and went to college at the end of the Vietnam War. I don't have, I was fairly isolated living on the farm, so I don't have a lot of distinct memories about Vietnam. So I got to rely on history. I think there's some parallels between the Vietnam War and now, particularly about public engagement and people's intensity. I don't know if it's at the same level as Vietnam or not. I would actually have to go look and see. But I do think we're building, if it's not, we're building towards it. And there's just so many external factors that are impacting people's everyday lives that their unhappiness around their current place in the economic scale is going to do nothing but, I think, get worse.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.